You're listening to Sudbury News Talk.
I want to show you something.
Stand by. On the morning shift.
Anything
could happen.
Sudbury News Talk on the morning shift.
All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Sudbury News Talk on the morning shift. I'm AJ Walsh. I'm glad to be here with you. I'm glad that you're here with us. It is Monday, December the 11th. It is 10 days away from the shortest day, or shortest days, happens over a couple days of the year. Can you believe that? And then after that, the days will start getting longer already. So it's pretty cool. Not to mention Christmas happens right after that as well. So it's a interesting time of year. A lot of darkness, the most dark part of the year. So a lot of people experiencing, different types of depression due to lack of sunlight. The fact that it is Christmas and maybe certain people will experience different, emotions and things that aren't so positive. So we'll do our best here to keep things as positive as possible, knowing that it can be a rough time of year for some people. But at the same time, let's work through it and keep it as positive as we can. There's always a silver lining to things, no matter how bleak things may look. You can always find the good in things. So let's try to do that. We got a great show planned for you this morning. We have weather, sports, and news headlines from around Sudbury and around our area, the province, the country, the world. We'll do our best today to unpack what's happening with journalism in Canada, in the world. Where is journalism? Is journalism still a thing that people can rely on to bring them the facts of what's going on unbiasedly? To inform them of the world they live in, whether it's their community they live in or the area they live in, the world they live in. So is journalism still doing what it's supposed to do? And again, because the low-hanging fruit, we'll talk about our paid for by our tax dollars broadcaster, CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, but at the same time, other ones as well. And the difference between the two, why is one held to a higher account than the other ones? We don't just pick on CBC. It's because they're given $1.5 billion of our tax money and still have a hard time managing that money and managing to bring us the news that informs us, right? So again, there's higher standards of accountability for that particular corporation over the more privately owned news outlets, which still receive the vast amount of money that they get, not only from advertising, but from our tax dollars as well, incentives and things to pay for. And now that Google and the federal government has come to an agreement, they're going to be getting billions, well, at least $1 billion. Yeah. So where will this money be going? We'll have to see. So we got that and much, much more. We got your comments coming in right after the weather and the sports. There's lots to talk about. Downtown, surprise, we have a story about downtown that, according to cell phone data, that people frequenting downtown has been going down, and it's down as much as 33% from before the pandemic. And many people are not wondering why, because we talk about it at length here on the show. So that and much, much more when we come back. Let's dive right into some weather. We've got lots to talk about today. We want to get through it all and your comments and much more. We'll be back right after this. Yeah, it's when you thought you hit the mute button, but you didn't. Things like that happen on a regular basis. Currently, it is -6 out there, but it feels like -12. Today, we can expect cloudy with a 30% chance of flurries, and wind will be moderate. Temperature steady near -7. And tonight, we can expect cloudy and snow beginning before morning. And then the temperature will be rising to -2 by morning. Wind chill will feel like -13 this evening and -8 overnight. Tuesday, tomorrow, flurries, about 2 centimeters worth. The high of 0, temperature falling to -3 in the afternoon. The wind chill will feel like -10. For your long range, again, 0 and flurries for tomorrow. -7, 40% chance of flurries on Wednesday. And then on Thursday, a mix of sun and cloud, high of 1, +1 that is, +1 again on Friday with a mix of sun and cloud, 0, and mix of sun and cloud on Saturday, and 1 and cloudy. So here you go. After, the next couple of days, Tuesday and Wednesday, we have a mix of sun and cloud pretty much with 0 and 1 degree as your high. So very moderate temperatures for this time of year. That brings us right to December 17th, and we're still 1 degree. So it's very, very mild for this time of year in this particular location here in Greater Sudbury. The satellite image for today isn't really loading. The last one we have is from about 10:30 last night, but you can just see all of the clouds there and just imagine it looks pretty much the same. That's your Sudbury weather, brought to you by SudburyWeather.ca. We'll be back. Sports update with how the Sudbury Wolves did the last couple games, and much, much more, including your comments when we come back right after this. And your Sudbury Wolves were in action on Friday night against the Niagara Ice Dogs, and with whom they made a trade. They acquired one of their goaltenders who will also be able to play again next year. And you say, why do we need another goaltender? Well, just because I guess they have him as a backup, because Vondras is going to be heading out for the World Juniors. And while he is gone, they'll need someone else in net as well. So why not the OHL goalie of the week from last week, who played very well yesterday, by the way. So he did not face his old team, but the Niagara Ice Dogs were in town, and he came with them and stayed after they left. But the good news is we beat the Niagara Ice Dogs 8-4 on Friday night. It was a great game. And then Sunday's game against the Kingston Frontenacs was very interesting, in which he was in net. We ended up early, like at the end of the first period, we were winning 6-0, then 7-0 early within the first minute of the second period. The score ended up being the same as Friday night's final, though, 8-4. So 2 games, 2 victories, 2 W's, 8-4 for both of those games. So again, we're putting on a pretty good product. We're putting a pretty good product on the ice, and we have high hopes for the Sudbury Wolves going into the playoffs. We think they're going to do great things, and so the next game, they're in action in Flint on the 15th against the Flint Firebirds. Then they're off to Saginaw, going to Michigan the very night after. And then they are in London the night after. So 3 games in a row, the 15th, 16th, and 17th. Flint, Saginaw, and London. So that'll be a bit of a rough, tough road trip for the Sudbury Wolves. But that's you can tune into those games right here on CKLU 96.7 FM. That's the good news about that one. And the fact that they've been playing pretty good as of late. Let's see how they'll do on the road. Not as good on the road as they have been at home. But yeah, tune in. CKLU 96.7 FM will have those games for you. We'll be back with your comments, much more, news headlines, and a deep dive into our media and how they basically covered the last 4 years, and looking back at the National Citizens Inquiry, if there was anything in there that we could see where media could take a look at themselves and maybe make some changes to inform you in a better way, which is actually their job to do, right? So let's look at that and much, much more right after this. Again, many people joining us online already on Facebook, as we are live on the radio, CKLU 96.7 FM, cklu.ca. Click on the Radio Player Canada app. You can stream us, download the Radio Player Canada app, take us with you and listen to us anywhere, anytime on your favorite device. We're also at facebook.com/Sudbury News, youtube.com/Sudbury News, where you can like, follow, share, subscribe. But you can comment on those two platforms, and through our technology that we have here, we'll do our best to get your comments read for those listening and up on the screen for those watching. So usually first to the game on Facebook is Judy, and there's no exception this morning. Judy, good morning. Thanks for joining us. Denise, good morning, everyone. Belinda, with a positive statement of the day, usually good morning. Courage is what it takes to stand up and speak. Courage is also what it takes to sit down and listen. Very, very important, for sure. Yeah, it usually sparks thoughts and sends me off into tangents, your positive comments of the day. And today would be no different, but we have a huge show ahead of us. But it's always good to speak if you know something, but it's equally important to zip it and listen. And that's how we learn, right? And we can learn from others' points of view. And points of view are great because they enrich us when someone else has a point of view that's maybe not exactly the same as ours, but they have a different perspective and they can add to our perspective when we listen. Trevor is sending a link. Trevor's got some really great links, by the way, so I encourage everybody to check them out. And again, unfortunately, I can't play links right here. So, local man from Sudbury. Okay, interesting. On Rumble. Oh, yes, Garnet Harper. The story of Garnet is a very sad one where he was refused, I believe, a kidney transplant because he was not jabbed. And so I guess the policies of the medical community said that, no, you can't get a transplant because you are putting yourself in danger. You might get COVID if you don't get the jab, right? So we're not going to give you a kidney transplant, which makes sense, right? What would happen if you got COVID? You could get sick. I mean, but we're not going to, something that we know you have, which is you need a kidney, we're not going to do it. But when he was actually on his deathbed, his partner was sitting there beside him. She receives a call asking if he could donate his organs. And so it was okay to get his organs if he didn't get the jab, no problem. But to give him a kidney, which he had a donor and everything lined up, wasn't able to do that. So that makes a lot of sense, right, from our healthcare system. It's nothing wrong there. So he passed away, very sad. Condolences to his family, and just a tragic, insane experience to go through, which makes no sense whatsoever. Maybe it makes sense if it makes sense to you. Maybe it does. You know, why should you have a kidney transplant when you didn't take the precaution to not get COVID, which then there was no guarantee anyways. You could have got COVID anyways, right? So, but everyone's doing it, so you got to do it just because everyone's doing it. Makes sense. Lots of sense. But now you're passed away and we want your organs to save other people who at least got the jab, because they got the jab, even though it didn't prevent them from getting COVID. So I'm not really sure why we wanted you to get it, just because everyone's doing it, I guess, because it doesn't prevent you from getting COVID. So why was it that important that he got it? I don't What again? What's the reason for it again? Can you remind me? What's the reason we need to be current to keep people safe? From what? We still get it. People still get it. When you get the jab, you're still getting COVID. So what? Okay, good morning, Maurice. Thanks for being with us. Anyways, we'll talk more about that a little bit later. Good morning from Collingwood. It's Liette. Thanks for joining us. Leandre, which I'm hoping I'm pronouncing your name correctly now. NDP has not said one word about CBC laying off 600 union workers. Well, that's interesting. I wonder why. They're so pro-union, the NDP. And all the people who lost their jobs due to not getting what we are just talking about as well, right? Where is the NDP there to stand up for people losing their jobs? I don't know. The NDP was known to be, so pro-union and whatever. We're just scratching our heads over that, I guess. Well, some people are. I'm not. After receiving money, more money than Justin Trudeau Communist Party. So NDP has said one word about CBC laying off 600 union workers after receiving more money from Justin Trudeau's Communist Party. Okay, just wanted to say that all together because it might not have made sense if I didn't. Belinda. Also, a nation in debt has no business borrowing money to give other nations and expecting taxpayers to fund the interest. That is what is at play here, and that is true. We are very much in debt. We know the party that we have here historically is known to be big spenders, and they did not go against the stereotype here in this latest government. They've spent more than any other government ever in the history of Canada, and we keep going more and more and more in debt. And it seems like they just give and give and give and give to certain people, but don't give like to veterans who say there's just not enough money to give to the veterans or other people. But certain people, there's no limit. They just have blank checks for people. Good rising. Monique, thanks for being with us. Denise, blessings today from Espanola. Leandre, we need to stop calling them liberals and begin referring to them exactly what they are. Communists that wish to partake in the destruction of the Western civilization. We've talked about that before on the show, and there's a lot of credibility to what you say. A lot of things back that up, that there's this Marxist ideology that the West and capitalism, the patriarchy, all these things are so evil, colonial, the colonization of Canada, the evilness of everything. You got to tear it all down. What they're going to build in its place, nobody knows. But just look how evil, look how bad everyone's life has been over the last 50 years. Look, it's been like living in hell, right? It's brought hellness everywhere. It's just been utter chaos and just, wow. Like, we've had such terrible lives. Everyone's had terrible lives. Now we need to make them better. We need whatever they're concocting up for us now. It's going to get better, right? Things are getting better since they've been in power, obviously. As you noticed, 8 years ago, your life is way worse than it is now because it's getting so much better in every way because that's what they're doing. They're here to make our lives better because the previous life we've had has been so bad and terrible. You need to tear it all down. Chris, good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us, Chris. Claire, good morning. And Liette, media is no longer a source of information, but a tool for propaganda and political opinions. They tell people what to think and no longer report news. Thanks for that. I tend to lean to that statement myself, my opinion. And Trevor says, this is the link to the WHO's article on current guidelines for the COVID-19 injections, out for the 30,000 plus comments. What does the public seem to be saying about those particular injections? Check it out. Trevor just shared that link. So much appreciated, Trevor. Thanks, and keep them coming. We really appreciate it. Jerome, good morning. Okay, so where's Mike and Nat to explain their position on upholding their discriminatory policies based on the COVID lie. Interesting. Okay, well, we can ask them that the next time they're on the show. And I think it should be a question because of the report that came out saying that Sudbury didn't do anything wrong by firing employees because they didn't get the experiment. You know, so yeah, it's pure murder. That is Monique. Denise says, since this started, I can't believe how many monkey see, monkey do. Yeah, again, right? Because we used to be able to live our lives without really thinking about who's in power, why they're making the decisions they're doing. My life isn't all that, affected. It doesn't really bother me. We become pretty apathetic to politics and, but we don't realize that things are kind of, they're making these decisions that eventually will affect our lives. And there was a lot of people who were on soapboxes saying, hey, look out, there's people out there who don't have the greatest intentions for us. They're doing things, and it's like, yeah, but my life is pretty good. I don't really care until it gets to you. And now you're like, wait a minute here, what's going on? Marianne, good morning, everyone from Snowy Berry. Yeah, right here, we just had some rain over the weekend, and most of our snow is gone. So I'm not too worried about that. I actually, and I apologize to those who really love playing in the snow and doing things in the snow. I pray for a green Christmas myself, just because I drive a lot and it's a little safer when there's less snow out there. Anyways, we get our share of snow year after year after year. The odd kind of, winter where there's less snow isn't going to hurt anyone other than maybe the ski hill. So Belinda says the willingness to save somebody's life, especially in the medical profession, is murder. Okay, horrible that happened to Garnet. Yes, we were talking about Garnet earlier. And a terrible situation, being denied a kidney transplant because he didn't get the experimental liquid, and then asked for his organs after he passed away. Town halls are the answer. Marianne says, liked and shared, appreciate it. Miles says, I know a guy who's been waiting for a kidney transplant for 3 years now, and he's still alive. Goes to the hospital to filter his blood 3 times a week. Not sure of the other guy's situation, but why he couldn't stay alive? Yeah, because his kidneys were failing. More, you know what I mean? Like the particular gentleman you're talking about probably can't do that forever, right? I'm thinking. So it only goes so long. It's not a long-term solution. You need a new kidney eventually. So his kidneys failed. And again, I don't know all the exact particulars about it, but you can look that story up. I think Trevor shared the link to it. So if you want to look more in it, I'm sure there's more details there. Denise says $448 billion. How much for Canadian we could have saved everyone in our country, your town halls. People, it's been the answer. So yeah, get out there, make your voice heard, get involved. Yeah, only you can make a difference. The government is a clown show. So many more comments coming in here. I'll get them up. And we need to move forward and move on here. Couple stories coming at you, local ones. First of all, our downtown, can you imagine that? Our downtown has 33% less traffic for some reason from before the pandemic. CTV does a good story on this. Let's check in with them, and we'll be back right after this.
Stephen Taft.
Stephen Taft did not deliver the uplifting news many wanted to hear, but there was some hope. The chief economist with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce says the slower economy and high inflation will continue for a little while longer.
We do think it's going to be tough and slow and choppy for the first half of the year. Having said that, as we see interest rates coming down, they'll provide a little bit of relief for everyday households and for businesses.
I have to apologize. This story isn't about the 33% less people downtown. It's about how Sudbury will flourish. Our economy will flourish, even though the nation will experience um, a lot worse in terms of economy.
And so I do expect 2024 to end better than it starts.
Despite the mediocre news for the country, Taff had better news for Sudbury. Based on specific data, he predicts a better local outlook, mainly due to employers hiring and consumer spending.
Of all the cities that we track, 21 different cities, Sudbury is third in terms of the overall spending patterns. So as their overall economy is slowing down, people in Sudbury are still spending, the wallets are still out there.
The chair of the Greater Sudbury Chamber of Commerce says that data tracks with what business owners are telling him. He's hoping 2024 comes with some stability.
I don't think you'll be able to predict exactly what's going to come, right? But I think everything we've seen so far is promising in regards to interest rates and things like that. And hopefully we'll just get some more predictability, which has been lacking over the last few years, because that's something that businesses are always looking for, is predictability.
The outlook also highlighted how the need for critical minerals will continue to impact the economy. That's more good news for Sudbury, which will supply many of those resources. Angela Gemmel, CTV News, Sudbury.
And we knew that was happening. I predicted that quite a long time ago, that Sudbury will continue to grow now that we're looking at the economy of, going for batteries and the whole electrified economy, renewables, things like that. Sudbury's going to flourish in that, even though overall the economy is going to tank everywhere else. So the Chamber of Commerce is basically, pretty much thinking the same thing on that angle. I did have the story here. I'm not sure what happened to it with the idea that 33%. Here we go. Cell phone data shows, might as well get that up on the screen here since I was going to talk about it anyways. Cell phone data shows downtown yet to recover from the pandemic. There's still approximately 33% fewer people frequenting downtown than there were before COVID-19 in early 2022. Approximately 33% fewer people. Location data from cell phones affirms as much. Canadian Chamber of Commerce Chief Economist Stephen Tapp told a local crowd during the Economic Outlook presentation that we just saw there. At this time last year, he reported similar results with downtown mobility 32.7% at the time compared to pre-pandemic conditions. The downtown's not back to what it is, Tapp said, later adding a chuckle in the direction of a table of city council members that it's not something everyone might want to hear. That's interesting. Mobility in the Greater Sudbury metropolitan area is still down 15% from pre-pandemic levels. Ontario's mobility level is down 17%, and the Canadian mobility level is down 9%. At least part of the clip is attributable to people still working from home, he explained. Yeah, so it's not entirely, downtown is, has deteriorated and people are afraid to go down there. And, what a lot of other people are saying, there's a lot of people that used to work downtown, but because of the pandemic, they now can work from home. After Tapp's presentation, Greater Sudbury Chamber of Commerce Chair Jeff Hatton said that despite lagging downtown numbers, he's optimistic. The city's core will rebound. It's not just unique to Sudbury, he said. Of the dip in the downtown traffic, he pointed out a handful of efforts by the city's elected officials to spur downtown activity as likely to yield positive results. The city acquiring downtown land in hopes of creating an economic hub with ancillary services around a new or renewed municipal arena / events center / casino. That's not part of this story, but I'm adding that in there. That we'll expect that debate to come back again. Will there be a casino as part of the new events center downtown? We'll have to see. Okay. It's and the proposed library project would also bring people downtown. Remember, we said it'll increase tourism, our library downtown. Another highlight to come out of TAP's report was that employment in Greater Sudbury was down 1.6% in November compared to February of 2020. This ranks the city as third worst for employment change amongst 36 comparable municipalities. Meanwhile, online job postings were up 41% in Greater Sudbury compared to the pre-pandemic, as 5.7% unemployment rate in November 2023, ranking the 21st lowest of 62 comparative municipalities. Top said there's not a lot of labor demand, but we don't have enough supply. There is a lot of labor demand, but we don't have enough supply, pointing to housing supply as a key factor. So many more things to unpack here. You can find that story right on Sudbury.com. Thank you for that, Sudbury.com. Okay, so moving forward here, CBC are preparing to cut 700 people, 600 to 700 layoffs, despite the potential $100 million of a bailout from Google, right? I said $1 billion earlier. It's $100 million from Google. Apparently, the lion's share of the $100 million media payout from Google isn't enough to keep the CBC afloat, as a new report reveals the public broadcaster is expected to announce major layoffs soon. The reports from municipal sources, including Le Journal in Montreal, indicate that 600 to 700 employees across the country could be out of work. Employees are scheduled to have a virtual meeting with the CEO, or they had the virtual meeting with the CEO, Catherine Tate, last Monday to discuss the organization's financial challenges and looming cuts. The anticipated layoffs, affecting both English and French services, mark a significant reduction in CBC Radio Canada's workforce, with over 300 positions in Quebec on the line. Ottawa recently reached a deal with Google, which promised to pay legacy media $100 million a year, as reported, by True North News. CBC would be the largest beneficiary of Bill C-18. The public broadcaster is poised to receive up to a third of this fund, as it employs a significant share of journalists within Canada. Catherine Tate sent an email to all employees on November 29th. The email said that she wanted to provide an update on financial challenges and give an update on what's coming in the next few months. But last November, Tate announced difficult efforts would be required to reduce CBC's expenses by $100 million over the next 3 years. Wow, it's the exact same amount that Google will be giving. Job cuts were not ruled out during the same month. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation said that CBC bonuses and raises have cost taxpayers $156 million since 2015. At a meeting with CBC employees in October, a hiring freeze was announced. While specifics of the meeting remain confidential, it's clear that job cuts are a significant component of the broadcaster's strategy to trim expenses by $100 million over the next 3 years, which I totally agree with. I agree, when you run a business, even though it's totally taxpayer funded, you need to be accountable. And so I wouldn't be giving myself bonuses when I'm struggling financially, but they have been doing that. And so now I guess they're in a position of, if someone was to really look at the books, like let's say Pierre Poilievre was to win the next election, which he is way out in the polls of doing, and he was to do that, he would then look at the numbers and say, do you really need this to deliver the services that, as mandated, you need to deliver? And the answer would be, no, we don't need this much money. We don't need journalists. I remember just recently there was an event that was in southern Ontario. It was a terrorist attack that might have taken place, or it was thwarted or something. And True North Media, which this story comes from, they're independent. They rely on people's donations for their money. Basically sent a reporter down to see what's going on with his cell phone, and was able to record and do everything and cover the story. But CBC sent the local people down there, and then they sent someone they sent like 6 crews from 6 different areas to cover the story, when one crew could have gone down there to cover the story. So they were just saying, yeah, they can kind of see where a lot of it's mismanaged, it's not efficient. They sent 6 crews, so you had a reporter, a camera guy, and another person maybe holding the microphone. 6 crews of 3 people to cover the same story. CBC, your tax money, right? Kind of thing at work. So I can see where it's bloated and it's not being run as efficiently as it could be. But on top of that, what's going on with, a reporter that testified at the National Citizens Inquiry, talking about they're not only not efficient in how they run the news, but how they deliver the news, like what they're actually talking about. He gives testimony of that as well. So we'll just check in on that.
My name is Rodney James Palmer, and it's Rodney, and the last name is Palmer.
And Mr. Palmer, do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Now, my understanding is that you have worked as a journalist in Canada for 20 years.
Yes, I've been retired for about as long, but yes, I did. I worked very intensely as a journalist here in the country for a number of media outlets.
And that includes being a general assignment reporter for the Globe and Mail newspaper.
Yes.
And you worked as a daily news reporter at the Vancouver Sun.
I did.
You worked as a producer and investigative reporter at CBC Radio and Television.
Yes.
You were you worked at the foreign correspondent, and you were the foreign correspondent and bureau chief for CTV News, based in India, then Israel, and finally in China, based in Beijing.
Yes.
Can you tell us about your involvement in reporting on the SARS outbreak in China? Because my understanding is you were there at the time.
I lived in Beijing and worked for CTV News every day, and that's when the SARS epidemic broke out. So I followed it extremely carefully. I went to weekly briefings with the World Health Organization. I went to weekly briefings with the China Foreign Ministry, and we attempted to cover the story as best we could from there. One of the significant stories that I worked on was the virus hunters. I thought this was a great phrase. What's a virus hunter? And this is a group of academic experts that come into a situation like SARS when it starts, and China allowed them to get as far as Beijing, but they wouldn't let them come to Guangzhou, where it was believed that there was the patient 1, and what they were trying to find was patient 1. So I had a little bit of experience with epidemics, pandemics, when COVID started, and I started noticing that it was extremely different. I was watching it very carefully as the news was trickling out of China. It hadn't come to Canada yet, but when they shut down Wuhan, I knew that it was very, very different. This was something that had not occurred before.
Now, and I'm going to skip over, unless we have time later on, about your involvement with reporting on biolabs in Canada. But you've been asked to testify about, the standard process of news gathering versus propaganda at the CBC, and I'm wondering if you can tell us about that this morning.
So to begin my presentation?
Yes, please.
I started noticing that something very different was happening at the CBC because I'm familiar with the process. I wanted to talk today specifically about the CBC, although what I'm about to say goes for most media, news media in Canada. But the CBC is very different. If you're the Toronto Star or CTV News or any private entity, Global News, and you want to publish something that maybe isn't true, or you want to take the position of a pharmaceutical company, you can do that. If you want to trick your viewers into believing something that isn't true, there's really nothing to stop them from doing that. However, the CBC is a public entity. We pay for it. It broadcasts on the public airwaves, and we expect them to tell us the truth because they've done it for 50 or 60 years. So what I started noticing was something very different. About a week, maybe 2 at the most, into the emergency, there was a story on the National by Adrian Arsenault, one of the greatest broadcasters we have, a national treasure. Adrian has a particular ability to appear to be discovering the facts in the moment.
So what do you do when this happens? A loved one, let's say it's your dad, drops into the family group chat with something he thinks is real. It's something about China manufacturing the coronavirus. There's a link to a site you've never heard of with a message calling it scary stuff. So what do you do with this? Do you ignore it? Do you call him out saying how ridiculous you think this is?
If you do that to your dad, you've actually shamed him. My name is Claire Wardle and I'm the US Director of First Draft. And we are a non-profit that we help people navigate the challenges of misinformation online. What happens is that your dad doubles down on his view and he dismisses what you're saying. Use language that's empathetic and to say we're all in this together, and rather than you're wrong, I'm right, here are the facts, because that does not work.
So hold back on all that reactive talk. Maybe try something like this. Yeah, these are scary times. We're all a bit afraid, but let's be careful. What you're sharing is inaccurate and it feeds into that fear we all feel.
Everybody's anxiety is so heightened right now. People are sharing this stuff not for any malicious reasons, but because they're scared too.
Sending more context could also be a good move, but don't drown them in evidence. Maybe send an article from a legitimate source quoting credible scientists on why the virus wasn't manufactured. Conspiracies can be just as infectious, just as dangerous as a virus, so you have to guard against them.
It's very easy to just mute your crazy high school friend on Facebook or to leave a WhatsApp group where people are sharing false information. But right now, I actually think there's kind of a responsibility on all of us to help people understand that sharing that kind of information is increasing the level of pollution.
Even if it's take 20, she can do it every time. She's a genius at what she does. But she turned this ability against us. I saw a piece on the 4th of April where she opens up and she's looking at her phone and she says, what do you do if this happens? Somebody sends you a family text, say it's your father, and he thinks that the virus was manufactured by China. This is on April 4th, 2020. It says 2023 on the slide. That's incorrect. It was 2020. And I thought, well, wait a minute. How do you know it wasn't manufactured in a lab in China? What evidence does the CBC have 20 days into this or 15 days into this that this was not manufactured in a lab? There was an assumption that she put forth instantly, and then she went to an expert guest who said, well, don't embarrass your father, you'll just push him away. You've got to bring him in and you've got to kind of convince him. And I thought, well, I'm a father. Who are you speaking to? You're telling my children not to believe their father. You're telling, and I have some expertise and some experience in this particular field. And I thought it was shocking that the CBC was trying to get in between me and my children. And the expert witness was from an organization called First Draft, and she simply says, I'm from First Draft. We're a nonprofit that helps people navigate misinformation on the media. And I think of nonprofits, I think of the Cancer Society, the Diabetes Society. I don't think of a group of people who are attempting to change the minds of strangers from believing things that they don't want them to believe. I thought that was all very odd. So I looked into First Draft, and I saw that this organization was developed and is developing new techniques and methodologies for investigating online spaces. Our latest approach revolves around the concept of recipes. As with food recipes, says their website, these steps give directions to investigators or to reporters. So they give samples of what you can do. They say, here's an investigation. How anti-vaccination websites build audiences and monetize information. This is 2 weeks into the emergency. Here's the recipe. How are these anti-vaccination websites funded? Investigate the ad trackers with GEFI and DMI tracker tool. Now, these are tools that they provide to, apparently, the CBC. Now, there was a story that circulated later about anti-vaccination websites on Marketplace and how they make their money. So this First Draft group is now feeding the CBC their stories. A second example, pro-Russian networks are driving anti-Pfizer vaccine disinformation. Now, I don't know why the CBC has to get behind Pfizer, which has paid out the largest criminal settlement in the history of American justice, but this is what this organization is saying, don't be against Pfizer. The Russians are behind it. The recipe was track misinformation across platforms such as 4chan, 8kun, and Reddit. So they're even telling them how to go after them, where to go after them. They're directing the CBC. I was astonished. that this organization was put forth as an expert on how to not believe your father, but not embarrass him at the same time. So this, to me, had nothing to do with news gathering. 10 days later, after the CBC did that story, the Washington Post did some real journalism. They pointed out that the State Department cables were sent from the U.S. Embassy in Beijing to Washington in 2018, warning about the Wuhan Institute of Virology, that it was unhygienic, and in particular, they said there was a serious shortage of appropriately trained technicians and investigators needed to safely operate the Wuhan Institute of Virology. This is January 2018. And there was 2 cables sent, and the reporter saw one of them. The first cable, which I obtained, he says, this is Josh Rogan from the Washington Post, warns that the lab's work on bat coronaviruses and their potential human transmission represented a risk of a new SARS-like pandemic. So not only at the moment when Adrian Arsenault was telling you don't believe your father if he thinks it came from a lab, it was not only probable that COVID came from the lab, but it had been predicted that it would happen 2 years prior by the US government. So how does Adrian Arsenault say it wasn't, and don't believe anyone, including your family? Flash forward a year, Vanity Fair magazine, which is known for its excellent investigative reporting, published an extremely long and exhaustive piece where all they did was go online and look at publicly available scientific papers going back about a decade. The first one in 2013 was by Shi Zhengli, who's the director of emerging infectious disease at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. She's known as the Bat Lady, and this is not a derogatory term. Actually, her scientist friends started calling her that because there was an outbreak of a SARS-like respiratory virus in a mine, and the miners died very, very quickly. And she is documented to having gone to that mine, scraped the bat guano off the mine, and brought it to Wuhan to examine. In 2014, she began publishing about the coronavirus from Chinese bats. In 2015, there was another paper that Vanity Fair found where Shi Zhengli discussed successfully inserting a protein from this Chinese horseshoe bat virus into the SARS virus of 2002, creating a brand new infectious pathogen. 2015, this scientific paper was published. Vanity Fair found it online. CBC could have found it, but they were too busy telling you don't trust anyone who believes this. In 2019, there was a paper actually published by one of the lab directors at Wuhan outlining the safety deficiencies in the Wuhan lab where he worked. And in 2019, right around the time that the U.S. government, the U.S. Embassy in Beijing was warning Washington about a potential SARS-like pandemic leaking out of this unhygienic lab, a number of the Wuhan lab scientists published a paper together describing genetically engineered rats that they had grown with humanized lungs and developed them in the Wuhan lab. So this is a pretty hot smoking gun coming out of the Wuhan lab. There are 3 labs in the world working on coronavirus, according to the Vanity Fair investigation. 2 of them are in the United States, 1 of them's in Wuhan. If this thing started at a wet market outside the Wuhan lab, it was because one of the staff members of the Wuhan lab walked into the wet market and brought it there. That is the most likely scenario. Now flash forward to this month, March 2023. U.S. FBI Chief Christopher Wray says the China lab leak was most likely. The quote is, the FBI has for quite some time now assessed that the origins of the pandemic are most likely a potential lab incident. So the CBC had no evidence that it wasn't. They wanted you to believe that it wasn't. There's a definition of news gathering, and you'll see, interestingly, that news gathering is one word in the English language. It's not 2 words as it appears that it should be. And that's because it's very specific. It's the process of doing research on news items, especially ones that will be broadcast on television or printed in a newspaper. Now, how much research was done by the CBC to determine 10 days after the emergency that it didn't happen in a lab? Another definition here is propaganda. Persuasive mass communication that filters and frames the issues of the day in a way that strongly favors particular interests. usually those of a government or a corporation. Also, the intentional manipulation of public opinion through lies and half-truths and the selective retelling of history. This is what was going on in that piece. That's why it felt so wrong to me, because there was no news involved. There was only propaganda. What the Washington Post did with its lab leak theory story 10 days after the CBC said it wasn't from the lab was news gathering. It was investigative reporting. What the CBC did when it said don't trust your family if they think it came from a lab, that's propaganda. That's the difference in the definition of those two things. The Vanity Fair piece, reviewing scientific publications for a decade and uncovering the fact that human lungs were engineered on rats in Wuhan lab in 2019, just before the outbreak, is news gathering. Exceptional news gathering. I'm jealous of how good that news gathering was. What the BBC did, reporting on the FBI, saying they've known for a long time that it came from the lab, was news gathering. That's kind of news of the day, daily news. They said it, we're telling you they said it. What the CBC did by warning Canadians not to trust their fathers about a lab leak theory was propaganda. March 4th, 2021, about a year after the emergency, the editor-in-chief of CBC News, Brodie Fenlon, wrote on his blog, a recent survey found that about half of Canadians think journalists are purposely trying to mislead them. Well, that's because we're on to you. At least half of us pay attention to our gut, and we know that you are purposely trying to mislead us. But Mr. Fenlon said that CBC is going to correct this. To promote trust in journalism, the CBC has joined 4 organizations. I didn't know that they joined these organizations until I began to look into this a little bit. One of them is called the Trusted News Initiative, which is designed to filter news through its own trust filter system. Another one's called the Journalism Trust Initiative. It's basically the same name, but this one does more or less the same thing. Another one's called the Trust Project, and then Project Origin. And notice that none of these organizations have the word truth in them. If you tell the truth consistently, trust is automatic. If you don't tell the truth consistently, you have to say things like, please trust me. So I'm just going to quickly outline what these things are, because they're all basically the same thing. The Trusted News Initiative and the CBC announced together on the 27th, prior to the Adrian Arsenault piece, that CBC and Radio Canada are joining an industry collaboration of major media and technology organizations to rapidly identify and stop the spread of harmful coronavirus disinformation. I think the pandemic really started in China about 4 months prior to this, and 4 months prior to an unknown virus killing so many people, there is no disinformation. The scientists among our commissioners will tell you there is only information, and all information is critical at the beginning, particularly at the beginning. So immediately they were in a position of pushing one side of the story. Stopping misinformation means censoring. Censorship, pure and simple. The Journalism Trust Initiative, a second organization that they joined, is run.
So he's going into the different organizations and what they stand for. And so I think I'm going to piggyback off of what this particular reporter is talking about as a kind of maybe a week-long look into how news has been covered, how it is being covered, what you need to look for, because it's very, very educational. What he's, showing the definitions between news gathering and propaganda. So that way you can tell if you are hearing news or propaganda. It's going to get very confusing even more now that with the advent of AI is going to get even more confusing with what do you believe? Who's telling the truth? Where is it coming from? Who's giving it? So we're already in a confusing world. We're going to be going into even more confusing times. And so I think we really do need to be looking at how do we know what information is credible or not, and what news, are there journalists still out there doing their job? And he pointed out the way that the particular organizations covered their stories were news gathering according to the definition, but CBC's news report was propaganda according to the definition of propaganda. And what other way could you know if it's propaganda than look to the definition and look through the lens of that definition at the story and if it matches, it's propaganda. So anyways, that's the show for today. We really appreciate you listening or watching. We'll be back same time, same platform, same place, God willing, tomorrow. So thanks everyone for commenting. Take care, and make sure to go with your gut and your mind. Both. They both have a purpose. And stay tuned now for Earshot Daily on CKLU 96.7 FM. Look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. And have a safe Monday, and we'll see you on Tuesday. Ciao, everyone.
This is Sudbury News Talk on the morning shift.